and begins to beat the guy with his cane to the point where he has to be restrained. Richard Lawrence,
I
yep.
wish I could have seen that.
He was 67 years old when he did this. 67, pulling out his cane, beating the attempted assassin. He was a tough old bird. Survived a couple duels, survived an assassination attempt, beat the heck out of the guy with his cane that tried to shoot him. Typical Andrew Jackson. Okay, that'll take us to our next subtopic then, which is the election of 1836. Question. Prior to the election of 1836, could President Jackson run again? Oh yeah. The 22nd Amendment of the United States Constitution that limited a president's term didn't come up until here. And we are just here. So you can see how many we have. Any of these presidents from here on to here could have run as many times. As a matter of fact, President Franklin Roosevelt holds the record of being elected to 4 terms. Okay? He died early in his 4th. But anyway, he could have run. Well, Jackson, a lot of people thought Jackson could run for president and win until the day he died. That was kind of the thought process. Well, the point being is he had had enough. He had a pretty rough life, did he not? And he was kind of ready to retire. He had suffered without his wife, so he announced he would not seek a 3rd term. Okay? He did not run for the 3rd term. So who did the Democratic Party nominate?
Richard.
No, he's going to be the vice presidential running mate. So
Did they elect Martin?
yeah, Martin Van Buren will be the Democratic Party's choice to run for president. He had served under Jackson as vice president. And his running mate is going to be Richard M. Johnson. So when Jackson decides not to run for re-election, the Democratic Party nominates Vice President Martin Van Buren, and he will pick Richard M. Johnson to run as his vice presidential running mate. So it'll be Martin Van Buren for president and Richard M. Johnson as vice president. Now, the Republican Party was so in disarray after the butt kicking they took in 1832 that they were basically out of it, and a new political party called the Whig Party entered the election. W-H-I-G, I think it's on your ID sheet. So the Republican Party has never recovered from the butt kicking they took in 1832. So they're out of it. And a new party forms called the Whig Party. Now, they knew they couldn't beat Jackson head to head. I want you to really think about this because I think you can pick it up. They knew they couldn't beat Jackson head to head. He was too popular. What would be the only way you could win an election if you couldn't beat him head to head? What? Well, kind of. Why would you want to get good with Congress? Okay, she's very close. They're thinking the only way we win is if we make sure Jackson does not get the 2/3 majority of votes. Now I'm going to give you an example. We had a school board election last night for this particular school district. And there were 5 people running for school board, 4 incumbents. That means they were already board members. And a new person, Sarah Lundgren, decided she would throw her hat in the ring. Well, there was only 4 seats open. So basically, the last place vote getter is going to be out. Now, when my wife and I were talking last night about this election, my point came up to this thing we're going to talk about today. Is does Sarah Lundgren have a chance? Or who does it hurt that she's in the race? Because if she's kind of popular, a new face, and people are looking for a change, and by the way, she gets the 2nd most votes last night, somebody's going to get hurt by the deal. That's the only way we defeat one of these 4 incumbents is if somebody comes in. Well, the fact that you have 5 different candidates gives people lots of choices, right? Lots of choices. Well, here's my point. The Whigs think there's no way we beat Jackson one-on-one. We have to get it to the House of Representatives. Like Willow said. How do you do that? How do you split the vote? One person running for the Whigs or several, maybe more than even two. So in this particular election, the Whigs nominate 3 men for the presidency, hoping that some of the people, it'll split the votes up so much that Jackson will not get the electoral votes he needs to win.
So then do they all run, have
Jackson's not even.
vice president running with them?
Right.
All three?
Right, but Jackson's supporters are going to vote for who?
Van
Buren.
Martin Van Buren. So they know they can't, and I should rephrase that so it makes sense, Cole. Jackson's the man. It's no different than what President Trump has done. President Trump is pretty popular among Americans for the most part. So what is he made 4 trips to Montana. 4 trips to a state that has 3 electoral votes. That's how bad he wanted both Republican candidates to win in Montana. He thought that's the only way they're going to beat the Democrats is if he goes and visits and says, and he said this, if you want to vote in this midterm election, we want you to vote for Republican candidates. So when you think about voting, vote for Matt Rosendale and vote for Greg Gianforte in Montana, because voting for them will be the same thing as voting for me. And that made a huge difference in a way. So basically what's happened here is Jackson is supporting Martin Van Buren. And they know they can't beat Jackson's popularity. They know they can't beat Martin Van Buren head to head. Can't do it because he's too popular. So they're going to run 3 people for the presidency. They're going to run William Henry Harrison, who's on your ID sheet. They're going to run Hugh L. White, who's on your ID sheet. Yep, Hugh L. White should be on your ID sheet. And a familiar name, Daniel Webster. So, the Whigs are going to run 3 people. William Henry Harrison, Hugh L. White, and a familiar name of Daniel Webster. Remember the old Federalist from Massachusetts? They're going to run all those guys for the presidency because what they're hoping to do, if you don't have a lot of choices, let me give you an example when I talk about this board. If there were just 2 people running for that school board position last night, how many choices would I have? I could only vote for one of 2. Well, when you got 5 running, you got lots of choices. So you might say, well, I like Martin Van Buren, but I don't really like William Henry Harrison, but I kind of like old Daniel Webster. And the hope of that is to split the vote up. Do you understand what I'm saying? So that Martin Van Buren does not get 2/3 majority. He might win the electoral vote, but the goal is to make sure he doesn't get to the magic number of electoral votes to make him president. That's the goal.
So do the Whigs have vice presidents or what?
Yeah, I don't, but I could give you that, but we don't need it, okay? Now, listen up. This Whig strategy of nominating 3 people for the presidency to try to get away from the electoral vote for Van Buren went down in American history as the favorite son policy. That's what they called it. They called it the favorite son policy. And again, by doing this, the Whigs hope to divide the number of electoral votes among the 4 men running, just like they did in 1824. Remember how many were running in 1824? How many were running? 4, right? And Jackson wins the popular vote and the electoral vote, but he goes to Congress because he doesn't have the electoral vote.
And then they can put Henry Clay on it.
That's right. So the only reason they're doing this is because the Whigs think they have support where? In the House. They wouldn't be doing this if they didn't think they had support in the House. Okay? So, with no candidate getting the majority of the electoral votes, the election then would be sent to the House, and the Whig Party believed they had enough influence in the House of Representatives that one of their 3 candidates would be chosen as president over Van Buren. Okay? Well, it didn't work. After all that. Van Buren wins 170 electoral votes, which is more than he needed. 170, and the man that finished in second had 73, and that was William Henry Harrison. So it didn't work. I think it was pretty good strategy
It just-
because they knew they weren't going to beat Van Buren one-on-one. I think it was good strategy, but it didn't work in this case. Van Buren gets 170 electoral votes. The closest to him will be William Henry Harrison, and he will have just 73. Now, this is kind of interesting. I think it's important. And I'll finish with this. After Martin Van Buren was inaugurated in as president, he gave an inaugural address. What is that? Speech, saying, you know, kind of what you got rolling. Well, he made it very clear in his inaugural address that he would follow in the footsteps of his predecessor, Andrew Jackson. That whatever he would be doing in office would mirror what Andrew Jackson was doing in office, and if you're going to have 4 years more of Jacksonian democracy. Okay? Unfortunately, we'll tell you this tomorrow, something's going to happen early in Van Buren's presidency that's going to throw him off totally, and we'll tell you that tomorrow. Okay? All right, fine job there. Fine job. Okay, we'll move on tomorrow. You poor buggers that weren't here for the early part need to get it off the video.